Hello, my name is Samuel Trapp. I'm a Russian-speaking American. And something's happened in the last couple of weeks. I've gotten a great deal of attention in Russia from views and likes and people checking me out because I started a Russian-speaking little short video segments which I sent out in Russian. And I've had a pretty good response to it. Because they don't believe that we pay much attention to them. I'm on a mission, and this mission is to let Americans know that we are mistaken, especially about the people of Russia. If you choose not to like Vladimir Putin, or you choose to believe that he's the Antichrist or some evil dictator planning to, take over the world, it's like Pinky in the Brain. And, of course, Joe Biden is Pinky and Vladimir Putin is the brain. I just came up with that. That's a pretty good deal. Somebody ought to run with that and turn it into Pinky and the Brain. But if you do, I want my cut. And anyway, everybody wants to say, I just heard it again on the radio, not on the radio, on some podcast I was listening to, where you always hear it like this, and you can't avoid it, but it's bullshit, pardon my French. It's complete bullshit that you have to do this, because number one, he's never said it, and number two, it's not his war, but they always call it Putin's war. Well, if you say it often enough, people believe it. I'm not saying he isn't a big part of it, because he is, but I've always said that Putin isn't starting a war, he's finishing it. This war started in 2014. And when democracy was decided in the Ukrainian oblasts that wanted to be subordinate to Russia, or wanted their own independence and didn't want to be part of Ukraine, they wanted to maintain their Russian language. Believe it or not, in schools, at that time, they did not permit the use of the Russian language. When you went to school, it had to be taught in Ukrainian. Imagine here in the United States, in Florida, or Texas, or California. Pick them. It doesn't matter where. If you said, well, you can't speak Spanish in school. You got to speak English. Oh, yeah? Who'd have a problem with that? 1 million Americans who speak only English. They'd say, oh, you can't do that. How can you tell these kids they can't do it? Those things are already behind us 100 years ago. Not 100, probably more like 30, where it was no longer popular to say, you're in America, speak American. And you can't say that. You shouldn't have said it back. I'm not sure. I'm not so sure I'm against it, and I'm not so sure I'm against it in Ukraine. But if the bulk of the people east of the Dnieper River speak mainly Russian, literally to the tune of 80 to 90%, how can you refuse? And all Ukrainians, almost to a man, speak Russian. Probably not the best way to go about your Ukrainization of it all. And now they're very terrified of Putin's speech with Tucker Carlson, which I listen to in Russian and in English and in Russian. And they did a fairly good job of translating them. I've made my comments on that already. You can find them on my channel. But I'm tired of our media saying that Russia must be our enemies because of one man. And I'm on a mission. I'd like to start some kind of a Russian-American friendship league, which, by the way, should include Ukrainians who are being used. What did Hillary Clinton call Tucker Carlson? A useful idiot. Well, number one, he's not. Number two, if there are any useful idiots out there, have a look at Vladimir Zelensky, one of the most corrupt people on the planet. And by the way, you couldn't have Ukraine as a NATO member. Why? Even now they're not welcome. And why? Not because it's in part because Russia said, you better not do that. We don't want you, NATO, that close to our borders. And people keep forgetting that. They've been saying that for 20 years. But the other part is Ukraine is so corrupt You can't have Ukraine slide into NATO with a government in the sorry state that it was. The Zelensky is nothing but a puppet for the U.S. He was a joke of a candidate, and he got elected. Why? Because he pushed for peace. You can believe that or choose not to believe it, but you probably should research it for yourself. The long and the short of it is, calling it Putin's war is really a mistake, because it may be in part Putin's war, but it's the United States war, like most of them are, and it's just people need to realize that, number one. And that's my point of view for today. I've given a lot of videos in the last 2 weeks in Russian, a decent amount in English. I've gotten a hell of a response in Russia, but I'm not a Russian spy or a spy for Russia. I'm not an apologist for Putin. I'm a reasonably intelligent American who happens to speak Russian and can see what regular people on the other side of the ocean are saying, and can also see and understand the history of what's going on in Russia. And if these so-called experts knew anything about Russia, which I propose to you that they do not, they would understand that Russia is not going to lose. Russia will either win or die trying. And I don't think Americans understand that about Russians. And I don't think they understand it about the situation that they are supporting right now, blindly calling it Putin's war and blindly claiming, oh, well, Russia just won Avdiivka. Well, they did not. Ukraine left it, which is what they're trying to make you believe now. And that somehow we owe an existence to Ukraine. Based on what? You got a corrupt country that their leaders are getting so rich, and I know I'm not alone in saying this, and maybe I have a different point of view. I know Scott Ritter's point of view. I've listened to it. I don't agree with him completely, but we worked in the same agency. He worked on the inspection side. I worked on the escort side, meaning I escorted treaty inspectors around the United States, and he went to Russia and inspected over there. But the same agency, and I agree with him completely that those treaties were completely trampled by the United States, not by Russia. They don't trust us over there, and you know why? We don't carry out our obligations even though we give our word. We give our word, we enter a treaty, and it's a joke to us. The Minsk Accords, which we didn't partake in, but Ukraine, Germany, France, I think, are the three big ones in there. They've admitted it's a joke. They admitted they never intended to honor the terms of it. Why in the world would Vladimir Putin, I'm not saying he's justified in moving in and trying to help out the people who are trying to declare their own independence from Ukraine, but why would he believe what we're going to say when we say, oh, geez, we're not going to move into NATO? I was talking to a rather foolish state representative, or I believe she was a state representative for the state of Missouri when I was speaking around the radio several months ago, and she said, yes, I was in Ukraine last year, several years ago in 2014, and I was on a NATO base there. And I said, you were what? I said, you can't have been on a NATO base. We've been denying that there are NATO bases in Ukraine. No, I was there. And of course they were. We all knew they were, but they weren't supposed to do it openly. They were supposed to say they weren't there. And that is the nonsense that we've been putting up with from our lying leaders for years. This is a mistake of colossal proportions. And if you're interested in knowing more about me or about my channel, please hit a like button and listen to some more. If you speak Russian, get on there and listen to my Russian version of the podcast. One day I intend to tell a great story about how the Supreme Court of the United States really needs an overhaul, and I have quite a bit of information to back up on that. Don't go thinking that our system is secure the way it is. We need some drastic changes. And President Trump called it the other day. Former President Trump called it the other day when he said the Supreme Court is corrupt also. Our court systems need a major overhaul. And I'd love to work in any capacity to help that get done, because lawyers, don't trust any bar association, don't trust any lawyer. They're all bought and paid for to anyone that's in the system. Normal lawyers that are just doing their jobs in local communities, they're great. But the bar associations, you don't kiss the right ass, you end up like me. And I'd love to tell that story sometime. Plan to write a book about it, but frankly, I just don't have time. And but I'd love to talk about it with anybody who's interested, because I got a great perspective. And by the way, I happen to be right. So if you ever get a chance, check out my podcast. Thank you very much. samtrap1@gmail.com. Samtrap1 on all the meta sites. Samtrap1 on LinkedIn, and SamuelTrap.com is my website. Have a nice day.